Hi there. In one of my previous videos, I talked about evidence for God's existence. One of the evidences that I cited was the extreme fine-tuning of physical constants in the universe. What do I mean by that? Well, consider the strong nuclear force, for example. This is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. If this force had been only slightly weaker, by as little as 2%, then multi-proton nuclei would not be stable. You'd have very little helium, you'd have very few of the heavier elements, and these are elements that are critical for life's continued existence. Elements such as oxygen, nitrogen, so forth and so on. If this strong force had been only slightly stronger, by as little as 1%, hydrogen would be extremely rare in the universe, and elements heavier than iron would not exist as well, or would be extremely rare. Once again, you would not have many of the elements that are necessary for life to form. The weak nuclear force, if it had been slightly larger, then neutrons would decay more readily and they'd be less available. You'd have an overabundance of hydrogen and very few of the heavier elements as well. Helium would be extremely rare, and without helium you'd certainly have a lot fewer of the heavier elements. If the weak force had been slightly weaker, then almost all the hydrogen would burn into helium. You'd have an overabundance of heavy elements made by stars, and you would not have hydrogen, or you'd have almost none of the hydrogen that's needed to form water, to form the aforementioned proteins and carbohydrates and so forth and so on. There are over 70 of these constants that we could go over, just rattling off their effects. Suffice to say that each of these constants has to be tuned to an incredible degree for life to exist, for life to even begin to exist. This is not a theistic argument alone, mind you. This is based on hard physics. In fact, no less an authority than Sir Francis Crick, who you may recognize as one of the discoverers of DNA, marveled at the incredible precision required. He said, and these are his exact words, "An honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to be satisfied to get it going." Now remember, Crick is an atheist, or was an atheist, and he said that the odds of intelligent life existing on Earth as a result of non-directed chance would have to be about 1 out of 10 to the 2 billionth power. Extremely improbable. Now, some people raise objections to this argument here. I think this is a pretty good argument that indicates that these concepts were finely tuned with a specific purpose in mind, namely to allow life to exist. But what are some of the objections that have been raised? Well, one angry gentleman said, "Why do you need to postulate the existence of a god or a designer? There's a much simpler, more elegant explanation. Evolution!" I think that's a silly objection. How can evolution explain the decay rate of protons, for example? How can it explain the precise tuning of the speed of light or the expansion rate of the universe, etc.? It's quite the opposite. These constants need to be finely tuned for life to even begin to exist, and therefore for evolution to even get going. It's a silly argument. Other people say, well, so what if these constants are highly improbable? Merely being improbable doesn't make something the result of design. Using that logic, if you were to win the lottery, well then, that must have been deliberate. That must have been the result of some deliberate decision. I agree, which is why I don't argue based on the probability alone. Rather, I argue based on the fact that these constants were finely tuned to an improbable degree in such a manner as to allow life to exist. In other words, they're improbable, they're highly ordered with a specific purpose in mind. Philosopher-mathematician William Dembski elaborated on this in some of his writings, and he addressed it in using a different formulation and with greater mathematical rigor. What I'm providing here is sort of a thumbnail sketch for the layperson. Design is indicated by high improbability and a certain degree of order with an apparent purpose in mind. In other words, designs or apparently geared to accomplish a certain goal. That's the way it is with these physical constants. They seem to have been precisely set with the goal of allowing life to exist. Another person said, well, a snowflake is highly ordered. Are you suggesting that somebody's designing these snowflakes? Remember what I said though, it's not enough that they be improbable, and it's not enough that they be highly ordered either. They need to be highly ordered with a specific goal in mind. The snowflake, the shape of a snowflake is, kind of pretty, certainly symmetrical, but there doesn't appear to be any, how do I put it, any function to its shape. You have randomness in the snowflake shapes, and their goal appears to be, they don't appear to serve any specific function. That's vastly different from, say, the precise tuning of constants in the universe, or the, how do I put it, the elaborate operations of a ribosome, all of which appear to be very finely tuned machines. Other people object by invoking what's known as the weak anthropic principle. What does this mean? Well, this principle basically says that we should not be surprised that these constants were fine-tuned to an incredible degree. After all, if this had not happened, we would not be alive, and therefore we would not be alive to marvel at their incredible fine-tuning. I think that's a silly argument though. It sidesteps the issue completely. It's kind of like driving off a cliff, hurtling head down to what seems to be certain doom, somehow miraculously surviving, and then dusting yourself off, patting yourself and saying, well, I'm not surprised that I survived. After all, if I had been dead, then I would not be alive to marvel at my incredible good fortune. Or to use a more classic example, it's kind of like standing in front of a firing squad with 100 trained marksmen aiming straight at you, hearing the command being given out to shoot, hearing the roar of gunfire, then when the dust settles, patting yourself saying, hey, I'm alive. Well, I should not be surprised after all. If I had been dead, I wouldn't be here to marvel at my good success, at my good fortune. Any sane person would be right to suspect that these marksmen deliberately missed, or that they had been given blank ammunition. Saying that you were alive to marvel at your incredible good fortune sidesteps the issue completely. It sidesteps the issue of why these highly improbable events occurred. In other words, the weak anthropic principle is not an answer at all. In short, I think we do have good reasons to believe that God exists based on this incredible fine-tuning of conditions that are necessary for life to exist on Earth, or on any planet for that matter. Life-permitting universes are vastly less probable than life-prohibiting universes. This is like winning the lottery over and over again. We should begin to suspect something, and I think we are right to suspect that there is a designer behind it all.